you. Okay. This talk is close encounters with red squirrels, and the words are mine, and the images, which are immeasurably superior, are Laura's. That's my wife, Laura. So this is a joint venture, let's say, but I'm doing the words, so you're stuck with me for now. But enjoy the pictures. Um, and it's sort of this is a story of an accidental study of squirrels. It's one of those things that came about in lockdown, so approximately 5 years now. 5 years ago in lockdown, we were looking for something that we could do very close to home that would get us out in nature. And there happened to be a tiny woodland nearby, 4 hectares, practically a patch of trees, absolutely tiny little woodland. And we've spent a lot of time in that woodland studying the squirrels. When I say study, I mean that loosely. We've been enjoying them, we've been observing them, but we've recorded what we've seen. We've recorded it in pictures and we've kept detailed records. And that's why I use the word study. The woodland itself is not semi-natural or ancient woodland. It's a plantation woodland, but 150 years old, so full of what are now really mature pine, beech, and oak, and some ash and other species. But those are the trees that were planted. They're now old and falling apart and truly wonderful, full of life, full of fungi, full of holes. So this is a tiny patch of very high quality red squirrel habitat. We've spent over 1,000 hours watching the squirrels in the wood. As I say, we've kept records. And in that time, over those 5 years, we've seen approximately 50 different squirrels. And many of them we've got to know quite well. So the talk is called Close Encounters. And over those 5 years, we have seen some close encounters like this. But we've also seen enough squirrel behavior to know just how rare this photograph is. Because once they reach adulthood, red squirrels are deeply antisocial animals. For them to be as close as this in a non-aggressive encounter is something that only happens under very specific circumstances. Normally, within a few meters of each other, it's fight or flight. So close encounters, and the sort of the fundamentally quite antisocial nature of red squirrels is in contrast to the sort of Beatrix Potter version, this charming image of red squirrels cooperating. Well, not so much. It's not really what they do. Once they get past the kit stage, and these are two quite young kits, when they're kits, they are quite sociable. Obviously, they spend the first few weeks in the nest together. Once they come out, they spend a little more time with each other. But once they transition to adulthood, um, then this kind of sort of close proximity becomes, yeah, very, very rare and tightly controlled. So close encounters between squirrels, something that we've observed. But when you spend as much time as we have in a wood watching squirrels, you also have close encounters directly yourself with the squirrels. Sometimes so close that you can't even get the camera lens to focus. So this is a squirrel called Smooth, who was very interested in us. She's no longer with us, but she was the boldest of all the squirrels, of all those 50 squirrels that we've seen, would literally come right up to us sometimes. And they each have their own character. So here's a different squirrel, a squirrel called Conker. This is her in her goth phase when she was younger. And just to contrast the different appearances and the different characters of the squirrels, here's a a youngster called Cinnamon. And you'll have noticed in the last couple of slides, I've been giving the squirrels names. And I need to explain that. I'm going to explain it, but I'm not going to apologize for it. Uh, so, naming squirrels. Here's a squirrel called Chocolate. Obviously, he doesn't know he's called Chocolate. There is a purpose to this. The naming of the squirrels is a shorthand. It's a way of keeping track on the individuals because we have been identifying individual squirrels and watching them day after day, week after week, year after year in several cases, and following their lives. And to do that, you need to be able to identify them. So we use all the obvious things like their color. This is a silverback, their gender. This is a silverback male. So this is Chocolate in his winter fur with his big tufts and his grey silvery back. But he's also got these nicks out of his right ear, the result of close encounters of a more aggressive kind with another squirrel. They do regularly take lumps out of each other. So that combination of being able to identify the squirrels from their various features in the different seasons of the year, and then put a name to them, a useful handle, a way of referring to them, shorthand, so that we can keep track and record what we've seen reliably for each squirrel. And it's sometimes it's no mean feat because through the year their appearance changes dramatically. Obviously, in the winter they have their tufts. In their summer, in the full summer sort of coat, they lose the tufts completely and they change color. So a squirrel that's silver in the winter will very often be ginger in the summer, and there are other sorts of coat combinations, but they always change color. They always lose their tufts. They go very sleek and skinny looking in the summer, and then come the autumn, as the new winter coat grows in, they have this sort of sleek, almost greasy look to them until finally they get back to the winter coat. So winter and summer coat, but actually that's misleading because the winter coat is the predominant one. The winter coat is from mid to late autumn through the whole of the winter, right through most of the spring and often into early summer. And the summer coat is usually just for 3 or 4 months. So that's the pattern. So we're identifying squirrels, we're tracking squirrels, we're keeping notes on them, and over the 5 years, we've seen about 50 squirrels. Here's a summary of a list of those squirrels. More males than females, so 13 males, 9 females, that's adults, as it were, and approximately, and it is only approximately 30 kits. And the ratio of males to females is significant. Females, once established as adults in the wood, tend to stay around for a long time, 3 years commonly. Given that they'd be a year old when they establish as adults, often living to, in the region of 4 years. So once established, females long lived and settled and don't tend to move. The males have much bigger ranges. They much more commonly leave the wood, often come back again, but certainly range much more widely. The kits, we don't know what happens to most of them. Only one of the kits that we've seen, we've managed to track reliably effectively from birth to adulthood. That's because the attrition rate is high, but also because by the time their first winter comes, many of them would have to leave the wood if they're still alive. So it's a complicated story. There's coming and going, but the overall sort of figures give you a bit of an idea what's going on, and survival is key to that. So we'll talk a bit more about survival and what it means to be a small mammal that many other things in the wood would like to eat, a small mammal that lives in and around trees. And what do you need to do that successfully, to survive as that kind of animal? Well, first of all, if you're living in and around trees, and bear in mind these animals do spend a lot of time on the ground, but in the trees, they need exceptionally good grip. So they have these phenomenally long, sharp claws. But that is nowhere near enough. And this brings us to the squirrel's first superpower. And the superpower, well, we'll explain it. We'll do a little thought experiment here. Imagine you live in the wood with the squirrels, and I say to you, well, come on, you live in the wood with the squirrels. Let's see you climb one of these 50 feet tall trees. Well, reasonably, I think many of you might say I'm balmy, and then the next thing you might say would be, can I have a ladder? Well, I'll give you a ladder, and with the ladder, like the squirrels, maybe you could get up the tree if you've got a head for heights. Right, what comes next? What goes up must come down. So you're 50 feet up in a tree. Now, do I take the ladder away or leave it there? Whichever way, I'm going to say to you, to get back down that tree, you've got to go head first. Have a think about that. You're 50 feet up in a tree and you've got to go down head first. This is the squirrel's first superpower. 180-degree, fully reversible rear ankles, which allow those feet, which power them up the tree, to turn right round and act as anchors for a controlled descent down the tree at speed, if need be, but a controlled descent. So this is key to how a squirrel operates in amongst the trees. This is what makes red squirrels truly fully arboreal mammals. And they're able to do this, which is, eat a hazelnut while hanging by their hind legs. That's the sort of behavior that you'd expect to see from, a monkey, say, a fully arboreal mammal. And this is this is a very high level of skill and ability we're talking about. We're talking about being able to forage effectively, collect and eat food while dangling on the outside of the canopy of a beech tree where the twigs are a couple of millimeters wide. um, it's highly skilled, and it's high stakes, because when you're dealing with twigs a few millimeters wide, they don't always hold, as you'll see in this slightly wobbly piece of footage if it runs for you. Um, this is a squirrel called Chestnut. Last year was a fun. She just fell about 10 feet, but caught herself and recovered the fall, and goes straight back to feeding in the outer canopy, gathering these beech mast on these incredibly thin twigs. And I'd say last year was a superb beech mast year. This squirrel was defending this tree against all comers. This is a high value food resource, and that squirrel was not allowing any other squirrels to go in that tree and to access that resource, even though there's plainly far more than she could ever eat. So it is high stakes. If you're concentrating on feeding in the outer canopy of that beech tree, something might see you. Something like a buzzard. And we've watched buzzards attempt to catch squirrels doing exactly what Chestnut was doing there. So They're sailing in and trying to grab the squirrels from the outer edge of the canopy. We've never seen a buzzard actually do it successfully because the squirrels are good at evading. But we have seen another interaction that initially caused us some concern when we set a trail cam and saw this. This was a trail cam set for the squirrels. And what we saw was the buzzard doing something that looked pretty scary um, from a squirrel perspective. However, if you watch carefully, it hasn't caught a squirrel. It's actually a young buzzard that is simply practicing. He picked up a stick, he's practicing hopping and jumping and doing all those things. But this is where this got a bit weird because there was an encounter. The buzzard sitting there, and a young squirrel, a young male squirrel, is clearly as interested in the buzzard as the buzzard is in the squirrel. And then we thought maybe that's the end of that. The squirrel's seen the buzzard and scarpered, but no, that isn't what happened. The squirrel came back again and again and attempted to chase the buzzard off the log. You can't, the squirrel's behind the buzzard and it runs at it. You'll see in a moment. There, the squirrel runs at the buzzard and then runs away. The buzzard goes after it. These are two young animals that don't really know what they're doing. And the outcome of this, after several more interactions, was a kind of Mexican standoff. The squirrels, there are two squirrels here. The ginger one is just down the bottom of the screen. You can see the tip of its tail. Basically, the buzzard got moved off the food, and the squirrels continued to eat the food in full sight of the buzzard's glare. The buzzard looking somewhat nonplussed, I would say. And after that, for these are both young male squirrels. Perhaps older, more mature, more sensible squirrels might have reacted differently to that situation. But perhaps a learning encounter for both. And after all that excitement, well, there's we come to the second superpower of squirrels. After all that excitement, they need a rest. And the way that squirrels do that is they power nap. So commonly, we'll be watching a squirrel. It will go off to a quiet side branch of a tree, settle down. Its head will start to droop down, and then the eyes close. And I have to say, it's one of the great privileges of spending time with these animals to be sufficiently trusted for an animal to do that in front of you. And this is the squirrel power nap. They do a lot of this. It's very brief. Sometimes these power naps only last a matter of seconds. Not, never very long. It's probably too dangerous in the middle of the day. But they're obviously enough to recharge, and then they wake up again, have a quick clean and scratch, and off they go in their high octane, very active lifestyle. But they need this. They obviously they sleep at night, from dusk till dawn in a dray, but during the day, these power naps are important. Yeah, it keeps them going, ready for the next bout of feeding and whatever else they're doing. So we'll talk a bit more about feeding. And in a sense, it's not so much a superpower, but a special adaptation. In terms of food, if you're a squirrel, what you eat to some extent is determined by how you eat or how you're equipped to eat. And squirrels' front paws have these. The thumbs are effectively a rounded pad, a sticky rounded pad that's used for very precise manipulation of food. And you'll see this young squirrel here holding a sunflower seed between those two. Effectively, it's a vestigial thumb, but it's like a fleshy pad, and it's perfectly designed for gripping very small objects very precisely while they eat, while they take the tiny bites, which is the way that they eat nearly all their food. So here's an adult squirrel doing the same thing. You'll see a sunflower seed. There's several bites in a sunflower seed for this squirrel. And the other thing that we observe is a lot of cleaning. So this young squirrel uh, is not eating, it's cleaning its paws. It's using its raspy tongue to thoroughly clean its paws, and especially those thumb pads, before it picks up a seed and starts to eat it. So in the course of these 5 years of observing the squirrels, we've seen them eat a wide range of food in this small wood. So the foods I list here are all ones that we've actually observed them eating, not surprisingly dominated by tree products, as it were, seeds. They're not that keen on acorns, by the way. Beech mast is number one. Acorns, they'll eat if they have to. Tree flowers, these are important in the spring, very important part of their food. Quite high, high nutritional value with sugars and proteins in the flowers and flower buds. Buds and shoots, which obviously are available for a very long period of the year, so again, quite important. A lot of fungi. Squirrels eat a lot of fungi. They eat them fresh. They eat them. They also take them up into the trees and stash them so they can eat them dried. They eat lichen. Lots of berries, as you'd expect. At the moment, the squirrels are eating a lot of berries. They also eat the larvae, so we've seen them eating large white grubs that they've hooked out of some dead wood. We're not sure exactly what, but from the size of them, probably beetle larvae. And then just a random observation that I'll come back to in a moment, of a particular plant that I would never have expected to see a squirrel eating. So we saw that squirrel earlier eating beech mast, and beech mast is, as I say, it is their preferred food. You can offer them any kind of fancy nut, hazelnuts in shells. If there's beech mast available, that's what they want to eat. I mentioned tree flowers. So here's a squirrel eating sycamore flowers in the spring. And you'll see it gather some here, and then in a moment you'll see it sniffing carefully the next bunch. And I think it's rejected that bunch because they were still in the bud stage. It wants the open flowers with the nectar in. Pine cones, obviously important, and squirrels have a particular way of dealing with a pine cone. They eat them, they rotate them, eat them in a spiral fashion. It takes quite a while to do a good job of eating a pine cone. Here's a youngster who I think has found a pine cone and is practicing. This is this is probably 16 weeks old at most. It doesn't really know what it's doing, but it's practicing. It's practicing with that pine cone, trying to get the idea. It's got the idea, and it needs to practice the skills. So that's what a pine cone looks like when it's been properly eaten by an adult squirrel. We were sitting under a pine tree. A squirrel was sitting above us. It spent 5 minutes eating the cone, and then it dropped that for us, to prove the point. And this is a squirrel eating fool's watercress, Apium nodiflorum. And I think this is possibly the most interesting observation we've made in 5 years. Others have been perhaps more exciting, more fun, But this is really strange. This squirrel, this is an adult squirrel. It had effectively had to leave the wood just, it sort of come right out to the edge of the wood and a bit further, gone down to a little tiny stream that runs there, and we watched it hooking out leaves of fool's watercress from the edge of the water and eating them. Now, you, if you probably guessed from the name, this plant is not an obvious choice for a squirrel to eat. I've never actually eaten it myself, but it's got to be very pungent. It's a crucifer. It's not actually watercress, but it will be a strongly flavored leaf. And my guess, and it is a guess, it's not, I won't even sort of give it the grandness of calling it a theory. It's a guess. My guess is that this squirrel was self-medicating, that it was doing what you see a number of wild animals and livestock doing. It's selecting a plant that will purge its system if it's got a heavy parasite load. That's a guess, it's a theory. I can't prove it. I don't have another way of explaining why that squirrel was doing that with that particular plant. Move on to a different kind of food stuff. I mentioned fungi. Um, this squirrel, you see, this squirrel is holding something. So watch what happens when it starts. It puts it down. It goes up the branch and it goes to collect another one. And what it's collecting is porcelain mushroom, porcelain fungus. And there it is. It's collected a fresh one and it takes it back down the stem and starts eating it. And if you know porcelain fungus, it's one of the slimiest fungi there is on the outside of the cap. The outside of the cap is unbelievably slimy. So here we are. You see what it's doing? It's holding the cap upside down and it's eating the gills. So it's eating the gills, which are not slimy. And then at the end of this, it threw the remains of the cap away. So this is sophisticated feeding behavior. This is picking a particular type of mushroom and eating part of the mushroom and avoiding the bit that it doesn't like. And that's what it was doing at the start. It was discarding the old cap, just eating the gills. Bit simpler. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of this, which is squirrel eating hawthorn berries. Very plentiful at the moment. Uh, easy to gather, easy to manage if you've got that great little gripping thumb mechanism. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. Even simpler, this is a very young squirrel and it's just going for blackberries. So yeah, not a highly nutritious food stuff for a young squirrel that probably needs protein to grow. But the best food sources are probably being defended by the adult squirrels, so you take what you can. And sometimes they take that to extremes. So there's a couple of young squirrels. One of them is not even bothering to feed, it's just messing about. But the other one is basically nibbling on bits of moss and an old dead wood. It's finding out what's edible by the age-old tried and tested method of trying it and seeing what happens. So these young squirrels are, they need to find food. The other thing they really need to find and make sure that they have access to is shelter. So if you're as small as this little squirrel, and this is the youngest squirrel we've seen in 5 years, this one is just out of the nest. It's probably 10 weeks old, maybe 12, probably nearer 10 weeks old. It's barely functioning in the outside world. It's just left the nest. It doesn't know much. It can't do very much. So it needs a really good shelter, a really good nest, to make sure that it's safe at least during the night, because it's got enough to deal with during the day. We might we might just see this little fellow again once more before the end of the talk. So we'll just talk about shelter. And squirrels are very good at making all kinds of shelters. They use what's available. You could start with the simplest, which is at the very simplest shelter, a crack in a tree. There might be some detritus in there that makes it a bit more comfortable, but it's a really basic shelter. In the summer, that's fine for an adult squirrel. That will do nicely. Doesn't need to be particularly weatherproof. Um, but during the year, they build a lot of these sort of twiggier nests using what's available, but their preferred material is honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is an important plant for squirrels where it occurs in quantity in the wood, and it does. There's a huge amount of honeysuckle in the little wood where we study the squirrels. And what they do is they find a big bush of honeysuckle, they go into the middle of it, they shred the bark off the honeysuckle and basically make a ball of lovely soft shreddings, and then push their way into the middle of it, wriggle around a bit. Hey presto, you've got a nest. It doesn't take long to make. You can make them anywhere you want, and each squirrel will have several of these at any one time. They keep making new nests and updating old nests. They steal each other's nests, etc. But they also use tree holes. They have to be bigger than a woodpecker hole. So this one is quite a bit bigger than a woodpecker hole. And this one has been used in the winter by a squirrel. But come the spring, it simply got turfed out because every year jackdaws nest in this hole and squirrels cannot compete with the jackdaws. So this could be used in the winter, but not during the jackdaw breeding season. Similarly, this nest looks as though we don't know exactly what happened, but it's been turfed out, it's been cleared out from a large tree hole. This is a squirrel's nest that's been cleared out, whether by jackdaws or other nesting birds or not, I don't know. And I mentioned honeysuckle. This is a very poor video, but it's the only time we've ever seen a squirrel collecting dry leaves for nesting material. So you can just see it hopping away with a big mouthful of dry leaves. Not a great video, but I think the point is, if asked, you might guess that they use a lot of leaves in their nest. Actually, they use a lot of moss and they use a huge amount of honeysuckle. And this is a tree that fell. It used to be used as a maternity nest. You can see the old woodpecker hole enlarged. You can see the nest above the entrance hole there. And you can see the beautifully shredded honeysuckle bark making up that nest. That's a really good quality. That was when the tree was standing. That was a really good quality nest that was used to as a maternity nest. That's in an old ash, and like many ash, of course, that tree is, its days were numbered. So we have been lucky enough to see the squirrel making a nest. I say they make different sorts, they use different techniques. This one, a squirrel called Chestnut here, trying to push a leafy twig of beech into the hole, but the twig is getting stuck and it's hard work. But this squirrel just kept trying. It just kept pushing and pushing, and it went back and got more and more of these twigs, and put in a huge amount of effort. It tried different techniques. So here it's got a twig without leaves, thinking maybe this will go in the hole a bit easier. So here it comes with the twig. No, the twig still gets wedged across the hole, but with brute force manages to push it in. And here she is again. And after about half an hour of doing this, it got to the point where she was like someone trying to do IKEA flat pack. You see the tail wagging there. She's basically getting really cross with this twig because it won't do what she wants. It won't go in the hole. But eventually she makes it. She gets the sprung mattress of beech twigs to her liking, and then off she goes to do, whatever it may, whatever that. And that brings us to the sort of, the cycle of um, breeding and the interactions of squirrels between, between each other and between, if you like, the generations. Um, so to get to the point where we've got young squirrels like this, it starts with this. This is those two squirrels we saw at the beginning having that close encounter. This is a male and a female who are in in the midst of courtship behavior, and much of that courtship involves chasing each other, specifically the male chasing the female. But what happens is in these chases is that it's actually the female that dictates what happens. In this case, it's a very gentle, very sort of nonchalant, gentle, slow chase. Sometimes the female will set off at incredible speed up the tree, through the canopy, at breakneck speed to see whether the male can keep up with her. Um, and, if all goes well and he passes that test, then mating will take place. And then the first thing we usually know after that is obviously in one of those nests, the female has had her young there in the nest, and we see her as a lactating female. So this is a squirrel called Nutella, an old mature female who had several litters, and you can see the teats on her side. Um, and here's another one. Again, it's an obvious sign. When we're watching the squirrels, if you see a female with teats protruding like that, she's she's definitely got young in a nest somewhere, and those young will be in there for 10 weeks, very roughly. And once they come out, that's it.
I think there's a bit of a lag, John, because we're still seeing the video.
Oh, we're still seeing the video.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a
Which
lag.
which video is that?
The one running around the trees, chasing
Oh,
him.
right. Oh, I don't know why that is. That's very strange. Thank you for right. And we'll go back to okay. Um uh, you're still seeing that video?
Oh, but it's not moving now.
Yeah, okay. Because I've moved on to a next slide. Just a moment.
Okay, that's we're now seeing a squirrel.
Okay,
Yep.
right. Okay. I'm hoping that you're seeing a female squirrel with obvious
Yeah.
teats. Yeah, great. Okay, so I've described that, and here's the other one, and uh, that's fine. We'll move on. So, yeah, at this point we know that there are young in the nest, and you should have a young squirrel now. Hopefully, if we've caught up, and at the point where we see a squirrel as young as this out in the world, you'd think this squirrel must surely still be being looked after by its mother. But no, once they're out of the nest, that is pretty much it. They're on their own. And
It's
if
sorry,
this,
it's looping between the lactating squirrel and the video,
yeah,
and back and
okay.
forth, sort of.
It's a lag then because
Yeah,
I went back to,
yeah.
so um I'll have to let it catch up. Um,
We've got the juvenile now.
right, good, okay, right. We should be okay because I think this is the last video.
Okay.
It's the videos that are doing it, I think. Um, so hopefully there's a short video of this juvenile now, which should play and just see basically what it's capable of doing is just about managing to balance on a twig, and that's it. Um, they really, at this stage, the the odds, let's be honest, the odds are stacked against these young squirrels. The statistics don't look good. There are dangers everywhere from predation, but also simply from mishap. Um, and that is, that's the way it works. So, this year, I think we've probably seen roughly sort of the order of 10 young have probably been born into the wood this year. Um, if one or two of those make it through to next year, that'll probably be good going. Um, and it's that trajectory from young squirrel like that to maturity and to successful breeding that is the challenge. So this dark coloured squirrel, is one called Conker, and she arrived in the wood at a year old and spent another year just being incredibly quiet, avoiding any um, sort of aggressive encounters with other squirrels, keeping on the sidelines, keeping away from the others, dodging in to get some food when she could, and just keeping herself to herself. She lived to be about 4.5, and by the end of that life, she was the most dominant squirrel in the wood. Um, and that's the trajectory. These characteristics change over time. So, you know, the once the mature females are established in the wood, they have some stability. They're able to maintain stability, stay in the same area, and live out a decent lifespan. Other squirrels have to come and go around them, and moving around to different degrees, changing dominance, going through the cycles of courtship and competition. And through that, we've seen, at different stages, different characteristics of squirrels, and it's hard to resist the temptation to describe it as character of individuals as well. And that's really at the heart of what we've seen is an entire society of individuals and interactions in this tiny little island of woodland. Their options are limited. It's make a living in the woodland with the other squirrels, or risk all the dangers of leaving the woodland and trying to find another woodland. This is an isolated patch. To do that means taking really serious risks, and for the males, that's something they regularly have to do. The wood is too small for most males to stay in it all the time. Very few, in fact, do that. And that's a sort of flavour of the complexity of what we've been observing. Um, but I just want to take a step back and just reflect on what we've experienced, as well as what we've observed, what we've experienced. Being in the wood in every weather, in every season, watching the changing of the seasons, literally sometimes, one leaf unfurling at a time, as it were, you know, visiting sometimes every day, um, and experiencing one place in all its forms. They say if you want to see wildlife, travel the world. If you want to understand nature, stay in one place. Well, I don't know if they say that. Maybe I just made that up, but I think it makes sense. Um, and that's been a privilege. Um, and a long way through all those seasons, we've seen so many stories. The story of this squirrel, Conker, who, as I say, went from a very meek individual that kept under the radar to effectively the top squirrel. This is a mature female, and when a mature female is in the core of her range, um, no other squirrel will successfully intimidate her. Not even usually not even a, a, a mature male. Um, and we saw Conker carry out, I'm afraid to say, the most vicious act of aggression that we've witnessed. She savaged another mature female at a time when both of them had young in the nest, and left the other female with, quite badly wounded. Um, and these stories, some of them are like that. Some of them are very different. Some of them are about the what we've witnessed in the change, the changes of the population, down to 3 squirrels at one point, currently probably at least a dozen, but changes in the wood. We watched Storm Arwen come through and flatten a significant chunk of the wood. We've seen ash dieback go from a minor irritant to devastation of the ash trees that infill between the pines and the beeches, and how that affects the squirrels, who now have to negotiate different pathways between the trees as the ash trees are receding and falling away, and the gaps are opening up between, in the canopy as a result. And then there's been the stories that have just been a kind of a joy and a magic of witnessing something that you just didn't think you'd ever see. And just recently, we've seen something that we've effectively waited 5 years to see, and that is what the young squirrels do at night at this time of year. And we found this nest recently. It's a perfect squirrel nest. It's high up in a strong oak. There's a huge honeysuckle bush up the tree. It's a big nest. And we were sitting in the wood one evening and noticed a couple of young squirrels nearby to this nest. And then suddenly one of them ran down into the nest, then the other one, and then more. And 6 young squirrels from at least two different litters are sharing the night together in this nest up in the oak tree. If you look carefully, to the lower left of the nest, there's a young squirrel on the bark. It's partly obscured by the leaves. Here, there's another one just sticking out at the sort of to the left above the nest. And we thought probably the young squirrels must share a nest at this stage. They're very small to be on their own, through the night in the wood. But to actually see 5, 6 young squirrels, one by one, deciding to turn in for the night and all going into that same nest, it's just a joy and something that has added one more tiny piece to the puzzle that we've been accidentally piecing together for the past 5 years. And on that, I think I will say thank you for listening. I will stop sharing my screen.
Oh, hello. So sorry, I was trying to unmute myself there. Well, thank you very much for that, John. That's just well done. I'm just so impressed. You know, the consummate naturalist, and so impressed. But I'm quite interested in when you about what these young squirrels eat. I mean, they leave the nest at 10 weeks. And how do they manage to sustain themselves at that point? And then the question about the fungi, I can see that eating the fungi, eating the gills, you're going to have more protein because that's where the spores are in there. But you say you observed them eating lichen. How often did you see that?
Yeah, that's quite common. It's not unusual at all. You know, and so going back to the first bit of your question, I would say, for the young squirrels, it is trial and error, because once they leave the nest, effectively there is no further parental care. It is trial and error. Clearly, and what I didn't mention that they do have, and this is I should have mentioned this. This is the other squirrel superpower. What all squirrels have is an astonishing sense of smell, and they are different to us, in that their sense of smell is what is as the primary wiring into their brains. So squirrels have good eyesight, good hearing, but exceptional sense of smell, and that's the sense that they use, sort of prioritized over the other senses. So very frequently we will see a squirrel walk past an item of food of any kind. It's got good eyesight, but it won't have noticed it until its nose picks it up, at which point it will stop, sort of lift itself up a bit, focus its sense of smell, and then retrace its steps and locate the food. So, there's trial and error, and there's a phenomenal sense of smell. They're able to tell, a good hazelnut from a bad hazelnut without opening the shell, etc.
Okay, thank you. And so there's a question here from Sam who says, have you seen any incursion of grey squirrels in your area?
No, we're on Anglesey, and this is an isolated wood. So, we would be, we're a long way from the bridges, which is obviously the point of incursion for any grey squirrels crossing onto the island. And I suspect and hope that long before grey squirrels got anywhere near us, they'd have been picked up in some of the woods nearer to the bridges, which is where they're most likely to come from.
Yeah, we've got John's got his hand up to ask a question. Do you want to unmute, John? There you go.
Bottom left on my screen to unmute.
Oh,
Okay.
there you go.
Yeah.
All right. John, unless I missed something, which I probably did, I don't think you mentioned the gestation period for the young, for the
Yeah.
Do you know how long that is, or is it very difficult to determine because they're very secretive about it?
Yeah, it would be very difficult to discern by observation, but I think the books say 30 something. Can't remember the exact number. It's 38 days. It's fairly exact, apparently. Um, so we observe courtship behavior, right, not through the year, but periodically we see courtship behavior, and it can start as early as December, and it can then occur at various points. So there's a long window within which females can get pregnant and give birth. In some years it can be more than one litter, and it's really quite a long season for them potentially, if the weather etc allows. Last year, like everything else, with the weather was so bad last year that there were very few young born at all in the wood. This year it's been a much better year, as with pretty much everything else, and we've seen several litters spaced out, sort of across the middle part of the year.
Thank you.
So one more question here in the chat. Are females likely to remain near the place of their birth in order to breed, and so genetic variation is largely dependent on incoming males?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really good question. So there's a problem there, and this is where it's interesting to consider what happens in a very small fragment of woodland like the one that we visit, and what happens in a large expanse of woodland where there's much more ability to move around. So let's say females, once they're established within the wood, and there's room in such a tiny wood, there's room for roughly 3 to 4 mature breeding females, because it's such high quality habitat. That's a very high density. That's because it's such high quality habitat. So those females are not really going anywhere. So they have a litter of young. Most of them in a year will have a litter of young, mixture of males and females, obviously. The males pretty much are going to have to move. They're going to have to at least leave the wood for a while once they're big enough, and maybe some of them will later come back. The females, the problem they have is that until they are sufficiently mature, let's say very roughly a year, then there's not going to be a space for them. They're not going to be, they're unlikely to be tolerated. So they will either have to keep to the margins, as it were. If this was a large wood, that would be no problem. They could just move to a quiet, sort of suboptimal bit of the wood. In a small wood, that's really problematic. So right now, at the moment, we've got a bunch of young squirrels that are still in the wood, and they're using that lovely roosting nest I showed. But right now, we've also got one young squirrel that is basically living in a hedgerow just outside the wood. It's effectively, and that's probably what will happen to more of them. While there's food in that hedgerow, they can stay there. As the winter comes on, they'll have to make a decision. Decision is the wrong word, that's anthropocentric, but they will have to do one of two things. They will have to sort of brave the competition and the sort of peer pressure within the wood, or they will have to move and take the risk of trying to find another wood. We believe, it's hard to prove this, but we believe that we have seen sort of succession down a female line. So we think that although the squirrels probably have, the female squirrels have to keep out of the way, we think that what we've seen is after one mature female being effectively followed by not necessarily her offspring, but by another female that has been born in the wood. So it's quite complicated, and the bottom line is that that the task facing, the challenge facing the males long term is greater in a small wood, because they have to basically they will have to encompass more than one wood within their range, because it's just not big enough to support them.
Okay, everyone. No more questions? Nothing more in the chat? Well, thank you so much, John. Thank you for your time and for preparing such a really wonderful talk about this amazing study that you've made. And I can see that you and Laura have both really enjoyed doing it, and we appreciate your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to share what we've experienced. So thank you.